Welcome to the Nevada State Museum. My name is Bob Nylen and I'm the Curator of History. And I'm standing in front of this amazing piece of mint history here. It's a 10,000 ounce scale. And these were common throughout mints throughout the United States. And particularly we want to talk about the one here at Carson City. This is the type of scale when a depositor or a mining company would come with bullion that they wanted to have processed and sell to the US Mint to turn into coins or gold bars or silver bars, would come here to the mint, and the first thing they would do is check in, and then with their bullion they had to determine the weight. So at one end they would put a bullion bar, and for example the largest one that was ever dealt at this mint was 154 pounds, which was pretty unusual. That was pretty large. Usually they were more around 75 to 100 pounds, but it would have been put on this end, and then the weights would have been put on this end. This could weigh up to 625 pounds. Think of it, 625 pounds. So it was very important with the initial weighing of the bullion bar to determine what the weight was, because that was everything when it came time to determine how much a company or a depositor would be paid. The other part that we'll talk about in a second was the fineness, to determine how fine the bullion was in gold and silver. We're fortunate to have this on display. It is incredibly heavy, as you can imagine, to weigh up to that 625 pounds. But in a second, let's talk about some of the other scales that were used throughout the mint. To continue our little tour of looking at scales, we're in another part of the museum for an exhibit area. And this two scales here, the one we want to focus on is the one in the back. This is the type they would have used in the assay office. Now, earlier we mentioned about the 10,000 ounce scales and weighing the bullion bars as they came in. But the next part of the determination of the type of value of that bullion bar would be an assay. And that would be involved with taking some samples from the bar after it had been melted down. They would send it to the assay's office. They would do a number of tests. But one thing they would do is, again, they would have to weigh the different specimens they had. They had to get into areas of where the weights that they used were incredibly small. For example, the smallest one they used was 1/1300th part of a grain. It was so small you couldn't even see it with the naked eye unless you put it on a piece of white paper. You can imagine they had to use tweezers with that to get the precision, because that would help them determine the fineness of if it was a gold melt or if it was silver, and then getting up to the highest level for the 0.999 fine if they went that direction. So very important role. And usually the assayer was the most knowledgeable person at a mint. So they turned to him in many cases to answer numerous questions relating to the mint's operation. As we continue our tour of scales, I wanted to point out this one right here. This smaller scale was very important, though. It was used by the adjusters. And those are women workers who worked up in the second floor of the Carson City Mint here. And their job was quality control, if we could use that modern term today. They would take the blanks, and we actually have one in the scale here. They would review them before they would go onto the coin press. And this was a very important task because the weight factor was critical that they had it correct. So when they would receive a blank, they could pick one up in their fingers and they would know right away if it was too heavy or too light. After doing thousands of these, they would have a sensitivity. If it was too light, there's nothing they could do with it. They put it in a bin and then it'd be recycled later into another different blank. But if it was too heavy, they could actually take some tweezers, hold it with the tweezers, and then on the edge, file the side very gently, nothing roughly, but very gently. And then the scale was there in front of them to keep checking and to get the right weight. It might take 3, 4, 5 times before they got it just right. Then it was ready. It could be passed on to the next stage, and then it would eventually go on to the coin presses. Now, one thing is interesting with gold blanks, they had a special second opinion on those pieces. The adjuster would work on those, get them to the right weight, but they couldn't just send them forward. It had to go to the woman who was the foreman. She was called the forewoman. And she would have the final say. She would check the blank to make sure it met the right specifications before it went out. So you can see it was a critical part of the processing to be done before going to mint the very unique and valuable coins that we see today. And I think sometimes the women are overlooked for the important role they played here at the Mint. And I'm glad in recent years they're getting much more recognition for their accomplishments and what they produced and helped to make for a successful effort in the Mint. As we finish up here, I'm sitting at the adjuster's table. This is the actual adjuster's table that was used, one of them here in the Carson City Mint. And remember, I mentioned about that scale. It sat right in front of the adjuster's position that I would have been sitting at, but I'm sitting at right now. Now we've looked at the different sizes of scales from the 10,000 ounce ones to the adjuster size scale. And those play such a critical part of the success of the US mints and this Carson City Mint. And you have to remember, initially they weighed the bullion as it came in. It went through several different processes. After each of them, when they melted that down, each of the different processes, they would review the weight. So it was constantly being weighed through the whole process, right up until the point that it went to the coin presses, were minted, and then were bagged. And even the large scales, you would find that one of the 10,000 ounces, they would have also had those in the treasurer's office, which were sitting in that room right here. And in the treasurer's office, they would weigh sacks of coins before they would go out. So you can see they played a critical role in the success of the Carson City Mint and other mints. And so I hope you've enjoyed seeing the technology and the importance of the science that was needed with the scales to make for successful mint operations.